Jasmine Williams had just finished a long day. She was a successful businesswoman, a role that often kept her busy late into the evening. On this particular night, after a dinner meeting with a client, she decided to head home. Her car, a sleek silver sedan, hummed quietly as she drove through the well-lit streets of her neighborhood. It was a peaceful evening. The sky was clear, the air crisp, and the city was winding down. Jasmine took a deep breath, grateful for the end of a challenging workday. As she approached an intersection, the traffic light turned yellow. Jasmine was cautious and decided to stop at the light, waiting for it to turn green again. But what happened next was something she couldn't have predicted. Out of nowhere, she saw flashing lights behind her. A police car was tailing her. Jasmine glanced into the rearview mirror, noting that the car was rather close. She wasn't speeding, and she had followed all the traffic laws. She didn't think much of it at first, perhaps thinking the officers were on a routine patrol. However, as soon as the light turned green and Jasmine began to move, the police siren wailed, cutting through the calm of the night. Startled, she pulled over to the side of the road, her hands gripping the steering wheel. Her heart began to race. What could this be about? The officer's footsteps were heavy and purposeful as they approached her car. Jassim Marcus helped Jasmine into their car, his hands moving with a steady determination. Her body still felt stiff from the duct tape, and she could sense the exhaustion weighing heavily on him too. Her mind was spinning from everything that had just happened. She had never experienced anything like this before. Being bound, treated like a criminal, it felt like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. But now that Marcus was here, she felt a flicker of hope. He would keep her safe, she knew that. Marcus slammed the door shut behind her and quickly slid into the driver's seat. The night passed slowly, with only the occasional sound of the wind rustling outside. Jasmine sat quietly in the small, dimly lit room of the warehouse, her thoughts a whirlwind of emotions. She had been through so much in just a few hours: pulled over, detained, bound with duct tape, humiliated, and now, after everything, she was sitting here in a place that felt like a refuge, but also a reminder of how quickly life could turn upside down. She looked over at Marcus, who was sitting at the small desk in the corner of the room, his laptop open in front of him. He had been working non-stop, reaching out to contacts and making calls to ensure they were taking the right steps. He was calm, collected, as always, but Jasmine could see the subtle signs of stress in the way his shoulders were tense, the way his jaw clenched every time he spoke on the phone. Jasmine wanted to help, to do something, but she knew there wasn't much she could do at the moment. Marcus had things under control, but the unknowns loomed heavy. What would the officers say to cover their actions? How far would they go to protect themselves? "Marcus," she said, breaking the silence. "What now? What happens next?" He looked up from his laptop, his expression serious but softening when he saw her. "We move forward, slowly, carefully. We'll get the truth out there. I'm working on connecting with the right people, getting the situation investigated. But it'll take time." Jasmine nodded, her mind still racing. She knew it wouldn't be easy. The system wasn't perfect, and there were always roadblocks when it came to fighting against injustice. But she had to believe that things would change. She had to believe that speaking out, that telling the truth, would make a difference. "Do you think they'll try to cover it up?" she asked, her voice small. Marcus paused before answering, his gaze never leaving hers. "It's possible. But I'll make sure that doesn't happen. We have the right connections, and we'll make sure your story gets heard. No one is going to sweep this under the rug." Jasmine felt a small wave of relief at his words. She trusted Marcus more than anyone, and if he said they would fight for justice, she believed him. But that didn't stop the fear from lingering in the back of her mind. Fear of retaliation. Fear of being dismissed. Fear of being silenced. How long do we stay here? She asked, glancing around the dimly lit room. It was safe, for now, but they couldn't stay here forever. Not long, Marcus said. Just enough time to make sure everything is in place. We'll lay low until the right people start moving. After that, we'll be ready to take the next steps. Jasmine nodded again, but she still felt restless. The quiet of the warehouse felt both like a safe haven and a prison. She wanted to get out there, to speak her truth, to make sure that what happened to her wasn't forgotten. But she knew Marcus was right. Now wasn't the time to rush. They had to be patient, careful, and strategic. As the night wore on, Jasmine found herself lost in thought. She thought about the officers who had treated her so poorly, who had assumed she was guilty without question. She thought about all the other people who had gone through similar situations, who hadn't had the resources or the support to fight back. It made her sick to think about the injustices that so many people faced every day, just because of their skin color, their background, or their identity. I can't stop thinking about the other people, Jasmine said quietly, breaking the silence again. The ones who don't have someone like you to help them. How many others are out there, facing this kind of thing every day? Marcus turned to face her, his expression softening as he walked over to sit next to her. I know, he said quietly. It's not fair. And that's why we have to keep fighting. For you, for them. For everyone who's been treated this way. Jasmine felt a lump form in her throat. She wasn't alone in this fight. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for all the people who had been hurt by injustice. All the people who had been silenced by fear. And with Marcus by her side, she knew they could make a difference. You're right, she said, her voice steady now. We can't let this go. We can't let them get away with it. Marcus nodded, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. We won't. We'll make sure of it. They sat there for a while in silence, the weight of the situation settling around them. The past few hours had been a whirlwind, and they both knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But they also knew one thing, they were in this together. The next morning, after a restless night's sleep, Marcus woke early. He had made some progress on the investigation, but he needed to do more. He had contacts in law enforcement, government officials who could help push the investigation forward. But even with all the connections in the world, it would take time. Jasmine was anxious, her nerves still raw from the previous night. She didn't want to sit idly by, she wanted to take action. Do you think it'll be enough? She asked Marcus as he packed his things, preparing to head out for a few meetings. Enough to make sure this is taken seriously, he asked, glancing over his shoulder. Yes. We have to trust the process. It's not going to be immediate, but it will get done. Jasmine took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside her. She knew Marcus was right. They couldn't rush things. But the thought of sitting back and letting the system work at its own pace made her uneasy. She wasn't sure how much longer she could wait before taking matters into her own hands. Marcus seemed to sense her frustration. He walked over and stood in front of her, gently holding her hands. I know you want to act right now. I do, too. But rushing it won't help anyone. We need to be smart about this. Jasmine nodded, forcing herself to take a deep breath. She trusted Marcus, and if he said they needed to wait, she would. But it was hard. Everything inside her wanted to stand up and make sure the world knew what had happened. We'll get justice, Marcus said, his voice firm but reassuring. It just takes time. As the day went on, Jasmine tried to focus on the things she could control. She kept in touch with Marcus, offering support where she could, helping him with calls and organizing the next steps. The days ahead would be tough, but she knew that with Marcus by her side, they would eventually see justice served. Together, they would make sure their story was heard, and the officers who had wronged her would be held accountable. The road ahead was uncertain, but Jasmine had learned something important that night: no matter what happened, she wasn't alone. And that was all that mattered. Es were alert, scanning the area, always thinking several steps ahead. He knew they had to leave fast. The officers, though shocked, would likely realize who he was soon, and things could get complicated if backup arrived. They needed to get out of the area before the situation escalated. "Marcus, what just happened?" Jasmine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The events of the evening were still hard to process. She could still feel the cold touch of the handcuffs on her wrists and the tightness of the tape around her body. "I don't know," Marcus said, his voice calm but edged with anger. "But it's not over yet. We're going to make sure nothing like this happens to you again." Jasmine's heart pounded in her chest, and she let out a shaky breath. She was still in shock, but Marcus's words gave her a sense of comfort. She knew he would do whatever it took to ensure she was safe. And yet, there was a lingering worry in her mind. "What if they come after us? What if they do something worse next time?" she asked, her voice trembling. Marcus glanced at her, his expression softened but firm. "They won't. They've made their mistake, and I'll make sure they pay for it. But we need to be careful. We can't stay here. We need to leave and lay low for a while. This won't just blow over." As he drove through the streets, Jasmine sat quietly in the passenger seat, trying to calm herself. Her mind raced with thoughts of what had just happened. It was hard to believe that just a few hours ago, she had been meeting with a client, enjoying a peaceful evening. Now, everything had changed. She had never imagined that something like this could happen to her, especially not because of the color of her skin. The police officers had treated her as though she was guilty of something, without even asking questions. They had assumed she was a criminal, and in their eyes, her race made her suspicious. Jasmine shuddered at the memory. It wasn't just a traffic stop. It was an experience that would stick with her forever, a painful reminder of the prejudice that still existed in the world. But what disturbed her the most was how easily the officers had taken control of the situation. They didn't care to listen to her side, to give her a chance to explain. They had treated her like a criminal without any evidence, without any reason. It was as if her voice didn't matter. As the minutes passed, Marcus drove them further away from the scene, the lights of the city fading in the rearview mirror. Jasmine knew they were heading somewhere safe, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was still not right. She looked at Marcus, his jaw set in a hard line, his eyes focused on the road ahead. "Marcus, are you okay?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. He kept his eyes on the road, his hands gripping the steering wheel. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "I'm fine. Just worried about you. But this isn't over. We need to make sure those officers pay for what they did. You shouldn't have been treated like that." Jasmine nodded, though she didn't have the words to express everything she was feeling. It was hard to explain the mix of emotions swirling inside her. Fear. Anger. Frustration. But also relief. Relief because Marcus was here, and with him, she felt protected. He had always been her rock, her protector. He would find a way to make this right. As they continued driving, the quiet hum of the engine filled the space between them. Neither of them spoke for a few minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. Jasmine glanced out the window, the street lights blurring past, and then looked back at Marcus. He seemed so calm, so composed, but she could tell he was holding a lot inside. She wanted to comfort him, to tell him everything would be okay, but she knew he was already thinking several steps ahead, strategizing how to handle the aftermath. Jasmine knew Marcus would take care of it. He was resourceful, intelligent, and always one step ahead. He had made a career out of protecting people, first with the CIA, and now with her. But she couldn't help but wonder if they were truly safe. What if the officers started looking for them? What if they tried to cover up what they had done? Do you think they'll try to come after us? She asked, her voice laced with worry. What if they make up some story to justify what happened? Marcus's expression didn't change, but his tone was reassuring. They'll try, but they won't succeed. I've got connections. We'll handle this quietly, without making it worse. We'll make sure it gets investigated properly. Jasmine felt a small amount of relief, but she knew this wouldn't be over quickly. The wheels of justice often turned slowly, especially when it came to situations like this. She thought about what might happen next. Would they have to file a complaint? Would they go to the media? She wasn't sure, but she knew they couldn't let this slip away unnoticed. The truth needed to come out. As the car continued down the road, Marcus took a sharp turn and pulled into a quiet, secluded area. It was an old warehouse, one that Marcus had used in the past as a safe house. It wasn't much, but it was a place where they could lay low for a while. He parked the car and turned to Jasmine, his eyes softening as he spoke. We're safe here for now. We'll figure out what to do next, but I want you to rest. You've been through a lot tonight. Jasmine nodded, grateful for the chance to catch her breath. She felt drained, both physically and emotionally. She knew she couldn't keep running on adrenaline forever. They needed a plan. But for now, she was just glad to be away from the officers and the nightmare that had unfolded on the streets earlier. She sat back in the seat, allowing herself a moment of peace, but she couldn't stop thinking about everything that had happened. The officers had tried to break her, to make her feel powerless. But with Marcus by her side, she knew she was far from powerless. Together, they would make sure justice was served. Ine's mind was spinning, trying to figure out why she was being pulled over. Was it a mistake? Perhaps she had missed a signal or failed to notice something. She couldn't recall doing anything wrong. Jasmine felt her heartbeat in her chest as the cold duct tape dug into her skin. Every movement was restricted, her arms painfully pressed against her back. She was stuck in a situation she never imagined, handcuffed, bound with tape, and treated like a criminal, all for something as simple as stopping at a red light. Her eyes searched the area desperately for any sign of help, but the streets were empty, save for the police officers standing guard. The air felt thick with tension as Marcus approached the scene. His mind was focused, his body alert. He moved quickly, but carefully, his CIA training guiding every step. He had to stay calm. He couldn't afford to make a wrong move. Jasmine needed him now more than ever, and he wasn't going to let her down. He could see her in the distance, bound with duct tape and standing next to the police car. The officers had their backs turned, still arguing among themselves. The entire situation felt off to Marcus. Jasmine was no criminal. She was a kind, successful woman who had never given anyone a reason to treat her like this. But right now, she was stuck in the middle of a terrible misunderstanding. As Marcus approached, he stayed in the shadows, keeping himself hidden. He wasn't sure what the officers would do if they saw him. The last thing he wanted was to make the situation worse by revealing his presence too soon. But he could feel his pulse quickening. He had to get to Jasmine. She looked so small, so helpless, her head turned slightly as if she was scanning the area for someone. It broke his heart to see her like this, bound and humiliated, unable to move or fight back. Marcus's jaw tightened with frustration. He couldn't help but think about what these officers had done to her. This wasn't just about a traffic stop anymore. They had crossed a line, and he wasn't going to let them get away with it. His fingers gripped the device in his pocket, a small tool that would help him disable the officers' communication devices. He knew that without their radios or phones, they wouldn't be able to call for backup or alert anyone to what was happening. It was a necessary step in ensuring the situation stayed under control. Marcus moved closer to the officers, keeping his steps light and quiet. He could hear them speaking, but the words were muddled by the distance. His mind raced, trying to predict what they would do next. Would they move Jasmine somewhere else? Or would they keep her there, waiting for more instructions? Either way, he knew that he had to act fast. As he drew near, he finally made his move. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the small tool, using it to silently disable the officers' radios. There was no sound, no indication that anything had changed. He knew that now, they were on their own. Marcus stayed in the shadows, watching carefully. The officers continued their conversation, unaware that they were now isolated. Marcus's eyes never left Jasmine. She was still standing there, trying to make sense of what was happening, but he could see the fear in her eyes. It tore him apart to see her like that, but he knew he had to stay calm. He wasn't just going to walk in and reveal himself. No, he needed to handle this strategically. His training had taught him how to handle dangerous situations, how to read people and predict their next moves. And now, it was time to act. A few moments later, one of the officers stepped away from the group. Marcus saw his chance. He moved swiftly, silently stepping from the shadows and walking toward the officer who had been standing guard. In one smooth motion, Marcus grabbed the officer's radio from his belt and removed the battery, disabling it completely. The officer didn't even have time to react before Marcus, now standing behind him, grabbed him by the arm and twisted him around. Before the officer could say a word, Marcus spoke, his voice calm and measured but filled with authority. "I'm going to need you to stop right there," he said. The officer froze, his eyes widening in recognition. For a brief moment, Marcus saw the confusion in his face. The officer was trying to process what was happening, but he didn't have time to think. Marcus was already taking control of the situation. "I'm with the CIA," Marcus said, his voice carrying weight. "You're going to let her go right now?" The officer's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He didn't know how to respond. He didn't know who Marcus was or what his intentions were, but he could tell that this was no ordinary person standing in front of him. Marcus didn't waste any more time. He quickly moved toward the other officer, who was still talking with Jasmine. This officer hadn't noticed the situation changing. Marcus stepped up behind him, tapping him lightly on the shoulder. The officer turned, and before he could react, Marcus had placed a firm hand on his chest, pushing him back. "You've made a serious mistake," Marcus said, his voice now colder. "She's not a criminal. She's my wife, and you're going to release her immediately." The officer's face drained of color as the realization hit him. Marcus could see the panic set in. The man's eyes darted between Marcus and Jasmine, and for the first time, he seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. He knew he was in over his head, but he couldn't do anything to change it. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat when she saw Marcus. She had been waiting for him, but she hadn't expected him to come like this. Seeing him standing there, so calm and controlled, made her feel both relieved and even more worried. She could see the anger in his eyes, but she knew he was doing everything in his power to keep the situation from escalating. "Marcus, Jasmine started, but she stopped herself. She didn't know what to say. All she could do was look at him, silently pleading for everything to end. Marcus gave her a reassuring nod. "It's okay," he said softly. "I'm here now. You're safe." But Jasmine knew the danger wasn't over. They still had to get out of there, and the officers were still a threat. The whole situation was escalating, and they needed to be careful. Marcus wasn't done yet. There were consequences to what had happened, and he wasn't about to let anyone get away with treating his wife like this. With the officers now disarmed and confused, Marcus turned to Jasmine, helping her to stand and removing the duct tape as gently as he could. He knew they had to leave before things got worse. The sound of distant sirens in the background reminded them that the situation wasn't over. Backup might be on its way, but Marcus wasn't going to let that stop him. He had already made his decision. He was taking Jasmine out of there, no matter what. Jasmine, still shaken but now feeling the strength of Marcus beside her, allowed him to lead her toward their car. She couldn't believe what had just happened, but she knew one thing: Marcus would make sure they both came out of this safely. The officer who had been the most aggressive stood a few feet away, watching her with cold eyes. The other one, the woman officer, seemed to be looking around, almost nervous. Jasmine's mind raced. She didn't know what was going on, but one thing was clear: these cops weren't acting like they were doing their job correctly. This wasn't about a traffic stop anymore. This felt personal. "Why are you doing this to me?" Jasmine finally managed to ask, her voice shaky but determined. "I haven't done anything wrong." She repeated the words again, as if saying them could somehow make the officers understand. But neither of them responded. They didn't seem interested in hearing her explanation. Jasmine struggled against the tape, her body aching from the way it constricted her movements. She wasn't weak, but the pressure was unrelenting. Still, she pushed against it, trying to wriggle free. The more she fought, the more she realized just how much they wanted to keep her bound. It made no sense. Nothing about this was right. "I want to speak to a lawyer," she said, her words firm despite the fear creeping up in her chest. She had learned her rights, had been taught how to handle situations like this. But none of her legal knowledge seemed to matter now. The officers didn't even flinch. She could feel a lump forming in her throat, the overwhelming sensation of helplessness starting to sink in. But even though it was hard, Jasmine knew she had to keep calm. She couldn't let fear overtake her. She had a family, her husband, Marcus, and he would never stand for this. He was a man of strength, both physically and mentally, trained to handle all sorts of dangerous situations. He would find a way to get to her. She trusted him. But would it be too late? Meanwhile, Marcus was at the CIA office, finishing up his covered work for the day. He hadn't heard from Jasmine all evening, but it wasn't unusual for her to be caught up in business. He knew she'd call him when she had the time. But then, as he was about to head out, his phone buzzed with a message. His heart stopped when he saw the text. It wasn't from Jasmine, it was from one of their close friends, Tanya, who was concerned about something. The message was brief: "Jasmine's been arrested. The police pulled her over and now she's been bound with tape. You need to get to her. It's serious." Marcus froze for a moment, trying to process the words. His mind spun with confusion and worry. His first instinct was to call her, but he knew that wouldn't help. The police could have her phone and track his calls. He needed to act quickly, but carefully. With every minute that passed, the situation could be getting worse. His heart pounded in his chest as he moved into action. He grabbed his coat, and without a word to anyone, rushed out the door. His CIA training kicked in. He pulled up the GPS on his phone, pinpointing Jasmine's location. As a CIA agent, he had learned to stay calm in moments of crisis. But this was personal. His wife was in danger, and that meant everything else had to come second. Marcus's mind raced. He thought of all the possible scenarios. The police had to have made a mistake. There had to be some explanation for why they were treating her like this. He knew Jasmine, she would never provoke a situation like this. She was always calm and composed, the kind of person who followed the rules. There was no way she was involved in anything illegal. But the thought of her being alone, vulnerable, with no one there to protect her, gnawed at him. His stomach twisted in anxiety. He had to get to her. Fast. Back on the street, Jasmine's eyes scanned the surroundings again. She could still hear the officers muttering among themselves, though their words were unintelligible from where she was. It felt like hours had passed, though she knew it had only been a few minutes. But time stretched on as she was held there, her body aching with the strain of the duct tape. The situation felt suffocating. She kept telling herself to stay strong, but the reality of her helplessness was overwhelming. The more she thought about it, the angrier she became. These officers were treating her like a criminal, with no explanation, no reason. She had been polite, had obeyed their commands. Yet here she was, defenseless, unable to do anything to change the situation. "Please," she said, her voice quieter now, but still firm. "You've made a mistake. Please just let me go." But the officers didn't answer. They continued to stand there, as if her words meant nothing. Jasmine's head began to spin, but she tried to focus on something positive. She thought about Marcus again. He was the one person who could fix this, who could get her out of this nightmare. She trusted him completely, and she knew that wherever he was, he would be doing everything he could to help her. She could only hope he was on his way. Suddenly, Jasmine heard the sound of footsteps in the distance. It wasn't the officers, it was someone else. She turned her head as best as she could, straining against the tape. Her eyes widened in surprise when she saw someone coming toward her. It was a man, walking with purpose, and as he got closer, her heart skipped a beat. This wasn't a normal person on the street, this was Marcus. Without a word, he approached the officers, his eyes scanning the scene. The officers hadn't noticed him yet. Marcus had arrived. He was finally here. When the officer reached her window, he didn't immediately ask about the traffic stop. Instead, he looked at her with a hint of suspicion in his eyes. "Ma'am, do you know why I pulled you over?" he asked, his voice stern. Jasmine, trying to stay calm, replied, "I'm not sure, officer. I stopped at the light when it turned yellow. I thought I was following all the rules." The officer didn't respond right away. He was examining her face, looking for something, perhaps a reason to justify the stop. Jasmine felt uneasy but decided not to argue. She remained polite, keeping her hands in plain sight on the steering wheel. That's when things took a strange turn. The officer, without warning, gestured for her to step out of the car. Jasmine was taken aback. "Is there a problem, officer?" "What's going on?" she asked, her voice wavering slightly. "We need you to step out of the vehicle, ma'am." "We'll need to check your identification," he said, his tone still firm. Jasmine didn't want to make a scene, but this didn't feel right. She had nothing to hide, but why was the situation escalating so quickly? Hesitantly, she opened the door and stepped out of the car, her eyes nervously scanning the area. Another officer, a woman this time, stood by the police car. She was watching Jasmine closely, her arms crossed. Neither of them seemed to have any compassion in their eyes. As Jasmine stood there, trying to make sense of what was happening, the officers moved in closer, speaking in low tones to each other. Then, without warning, the man officer grabbed Jasmine's arms and yanked them behind her. "Hey, what are you doing?" she protested, instinctively pulling away. She hadn't done anything wrong. Why were they treating her this way? "We're placing you under arrest," the officer announced, as though it was the most normal thing in the world. Jasmine froze. "What for? What am I being arrested for?" she demanded, her voice growing more desperate. But the officer didn't answer. Instead, he twisted her wrists and applied the handcuffs with a firm but unnecessary pressure. Jasmine gasped as the metal bit into her skin. Her heart raced. "This is a mistake. I haven't done anything wrong," she pleaded, feeling panic begin to rise in her chest. The other officer, who had been silent up until then, finally spoke. "You're resisting arrest. That's enough." Jasmine could hardly believe what was happening. How had a simple traffic stop turned into an arrest? She didn't feel like she was resisting at all. Her mind raced through possible explanations, trying to grasp any reason for the officer's actions. Could this be a case of mistaken identity? But her name, her face, she didn't see how she could have been confused with someone else. One of the officers pulled a roll of duct tape from their belt. Jasmine's eyes widened in shock. "Wait, no, please," she pleaded, trying to back away. But it was too late. They grabbed her, forcing her against the side of the car, and started wrapping the tape tightly around her body. "What are you doing?" she cried out, her voice now a mix of anger and fear. The officers didn't answer. They simply bound her tightly, securing her with duct tape in a way that left her unable to move. Jasmine's arms were pressed behind her, and the tape around her chest made it hard to breathe. She struggled to remain calm, but every inch of her body screamed in panic. Why were they treating her like this? She couldn't understand why this was happening. Jasmine was a woman of dignity and respect, with no history of trouble. Why had she been singled out for this kind of treatment? Tears welled up in her eyes, though she fought them back. She knew she had to stay strong. She couldn't let them see how afraid she was. As the officers finished binding her with the tape, Jasmine's thoughts raced to her husband, Marcus. He was away on a classified mission for the CIA, and she hadn't heard from him all day. They had been married for 5 years, and while she knew about his job, she could never fully understand the danger he was often in. But now, more than ever, she wished he were there. He would know how to handle this, how to make it stop. Jasmine tried to focus on breathing, on staying as composed as possible. She knew she had to hold it together, no matter how hopeless it felt. But a part of her wondered, would Marcus come to her rescue? Or was she truly alone in this nightmare?